The girl who talked to strangers. Let me ask you something before we begin. Think about the last time a stranger was kind to you. Maybe they held a door open. Maybe they smiled at you on a difficult day. Maybe they said something small, just a few words, that you still remember, even now. We rarely think about those moments. We move on. Life gets busy. But somewhere, deep down, those small kindnesses stay with us. They shape us in ways we do not fully understand. Today's story is about a little girl in Paris, France, who believed, with her whole heart, that every stranger had a story worth hearing. A girl who was told, again and again, that she was too open, too trusting, too much. And a girl who, because of that very quality, changed the lives of more people than she ever knew. Her name was Celeste. And this is her story. Let's begin. Paris in the early 1970s was a city of contradictions. On one side, there were the wide, golden boulevards, the cafes with their little round tables on the pavement, the smell of fresh bread drifting from boulangeries, the sound of accordion music floating out of open windows on warm evenings. It was beautiful in the way that postcards try to capture, but never quite manage. On the other side, there were the quieter streets, the narrow ones, the ones that tourists never found. Streets where families lived in small apartments above old shops, where the paint peeled from the walls and the staircases creaked at night, where people worked long hours and came home tired, and did not always have the energy to look up. Celeste Moreau grew up on one of those quieter streets. Her family lived in a third-floor apartment on Rue des Hirondelles, the Street of Swallows, in the 11th arrondissement. Her father was a postman. Her mother worked in a laundry. They were kind, careful people who loved their daughter deeply and worried about her constantly. Because Celeste was not like other children. From the time she could walk, Celeste talked to strangers. Not in a careless way. Not in the way that made her parents' hearts stop with fear. But in a genuine, open, completely natural way, as if she simply could not understand why people, who were standing next to each other, were not already talking. At the market on Saturday mornings, while her mother chose vegetables, Celeste would wander to the old man selling chestnuts at the corner and ask him how long he had been selling chestnuts. At the bus stop, she would notice the woman with tired eyes and ask if she was all right. At the park, she would sit beside whoever was sitting alone on a bench and simply say, "Hello. My name is Celeste. What is your name?" Most people were surprised. Some were confused. A few walked away. But most, far more than you might expect, smiled. And then they talked. Her mother used to say, in a voice that was half proud and half worried, "Celeste, you cannot talk to everyone." Celeste would look up at her with serious brown eyes and say, "But Maman, why not?" When Celeste was 8 years old, something happened that her parents talked about for the rest of their lives. It was a Tuesday afternoon in November, grey and cold, the kind of Parisian day when the sky looks like old concrete and the wind has a sharp edge to it. Celeste's mother had taken her to the post office to send a package to her grandmother in Lyon. The queue was long. The room was warm and smelled of old paper and damp coats. Standing in front of them in the queue was an old man. He was very thin, dressed in a coat that was too large for him, with white hair and hands that shook slightly as he held his small parcel. He did not make eye contact with anyone. He stared straight ahead, as if the world around him was something he had decided to stop participating in. Celeste's mother was looking at her purse. Celeste was looking at the old man. After a moment, she tugged the old man's sleeve very gently. He looked down, startled. "Are you sending that to someone you love?" Celeste asked, pointing at his parcel. The old man blinked. Then something shifted in his face, something that had been closed for a long time slowly, carefully opened. "Yes," he said. His voice was rusty, like a door that had not been used in a while. "To my daughter. In Bordeaux." Does she know you are thinking of her? Asked Celeste. The old man looked at the parcel in his hands for a long moment. Then he looked back at the child. I hope so, he said quietly. We have not spoken in some years. But I am trying. Celeste nodded seriously. Good, she said. I think she will be very happy. The old man did not say anything more. When they reached the counter, he sent his parcel. Then he turned, looked down at Celeste one last time, and said, so quietly that her mother almost did not hear it. Thank you, little one. I almost did not come today. Then he left. Celeste's mother held her daughter's hand very tightly all the way home. She did not speak for a long time. When they reached the apartment and Celeste had gone to wash her hands for dinner, she sat down at the kitchen table and pressed her fingers to her eyes. She had understood something that afternoon that she could not quite put into words. That her daughter, this child who talked to strangers, was not careless. She was paying attention. She was paying attention in a way that most adults had. Celeste grew up without losing that quality. Which is rarer than it sounds. Life has a way of closing people slowly, disappointment by disappointment, hurt by hurt, until the open doors become walls and the warm greetings become careful nods. But Celeste remained open. Even when it cost her. At school, the other children found her strange. She was the girl who sat with the new student no one else would speak to. She was the girl who asked the teacher questions not because she wanted to impress anyone, but because she genuinely wanted to know the answers. She was the girl who noticed when someone was having a bad day and said something about it, which, in the complicated social world of 12-year-olds, was not always welcome. She was not unpopular. But she was not easy to categorize. And people who are hard to categorize make others uncomfortable. Her closest friend was a girl named Isabel, sharp, funny, and deeply practical. Isabel used to say, Celeste, one day your kindness is going to get you into trouble. Celeste used to reply, and one day yours might get you out of it. After school, Celeste studied social work at a small college in Paris. It was not a glamorous choice. It was not the kind of career that impressed people at dinner parties. But Celeste had known since she was 8 years old, since a thin old man in a post office said I almost did not come today, that the thing she wanted to do with her life was be present for people at the moments when they needed it most. She began working at a community center in the 20th arrondissement when she was 23. It was a small place on a side street, with a wooden sign that was always slightly crooked, and inside, a kitchen that served hot meals, a room for children to do homework after school, and a tiny office where Celeste sat and listened to whoever came to the door. And people came. More and more of them, over the years. An elderly Algerian man, who had lived in Paris for 40 years and never learned to read, Celeste found him a tutor, and came twice a week to sit with him as he learned. A young woman from Poland, newly arrived in the city, alone and frightened and unable to speak French, Celeste spent her lunch breaks teaching her, badly and joyfully, until the woman could order her own coffee and laugh about the pronunciation. A teenage boy from the neighborhood, who had stopped going to school and spent his days sitting on the steps outside, Celeste brought him a cup of tea one afternoon and asked him what he was afraid of. He talked for 2 hours. He went back to school the following Monday. In 1995, the community center nearly closed. The funding had been cut. The building needed repairs. The organization that supported them had run out of money, and the letter from the city council was polite, but final. They had 60 days. Celeste read the letter on a Friday afternoon, alone in her small office. She put it down on the desk. She looked at the wall, where there were photographs, dozens of them, pinned there over the years. Faces. Names she knew. People who had sat in that room, in that chair, and talked and been listened to and gone away a little lighter than they had arrived. She picked up the phone and called Isabel. They are closing us, she said. There was a pause. Then Isabel, sharp, practical, loyal Isabel, said, "No, they are not. Meet me tomorrow morning." What followed was 3 months of the most exhausting, unglamorous, deeply human work Celeste had ever done. Isabel, who had become a journalist, wrote about the center in the newspaper, not a dramatic article, just a quiet, honest one that described the people who used it and what it meant to them. Celeste went door to door in the neighborhood, talking to shopkeepers and residents and anyone who would listen. The teenage boy who had gone back to school, now 22 and working at a bakery, organized a fundraising dinner. The Polish woman, now fluent in French and working as a nurse, donated a month's salary. The old Algerian man, who had learned to read, wrote a letter to the mayor of Paris. It was short and simple and not perfectly spelled. But it said, clearly and with great dignity, that this center had given him back something he thought he had lost forever. That he had lived 60 years feeling ashamed of something that was not his fault. And that one person, one young woman with an open face and a cup of tea, had changed that. The mayor read the letter. Then she read Isabel's article. Then she visited the center herself, on a Wednesday morning, unannounced. The funding was restored within the month. Celeste worked at the community center for 31 years. She retired in 2003, when she was 54 years old, with bad knees and a desk drawer full of notes and letters and small drawings that people had given her over the years. At her retirement gathering, held in the center's kitchen, because it was the only room big enough, more than 100 people came. Some had traveled from other cities. The old Algerian man, now in his 80s, came with his granddaughter, who was studying to be a doctor. The Polish woman came and brought flowers and cried and laughed at the same time. The teenage boy, now a man in his 30s with children of his own, stood up and tried to give a speech, and could not finish it, and nobody minded. Isabel stood at the back of the room, watching, and thought about what she had said to Celeste when they were 12 years old, "Your kindness is going to get you into trouble." She had been wrong. It had gotten Celeste into something else entirely. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Celeste sat alone in her small office for the last time. The photographs were still on the wall. She looked at them for a long time. She thought about the old man in the post office. She had never learned his name. She did not know if his daughter in Bordeaux had opened the parcel and understood what it meant. She did not know if it had worked, the reaching out, the trying, the parcel wrapped in brown paper, and sent across the distance between two people who had once loved each other and lost their way. She hoped it had. She had been hoping it had for 46 years. She turned off the light. She locked the door. She walked down the stairs and out onto the street, where the Parisian evening was doing what it always did, glowing golden, and indifferent and beautiful. And she stood there for a moment, breathing it in. Then she smiled. And walked home. We never know, when we speak to a stranger, what we are setting in motion. A question asked at the right moment. A smile across a waiting room. A cup of tea placed on a step beside someone who is sitting alone. These things seem small. They are not small. They are, in fact, the most powerful things we ever do. Hello. My name is Celeste. What is your name? 31 years. 100 lives. One open heart. That was enough. That will always be enough. Moral of the story. Kindness is not a weakness. Openness is not naivety. The people who stay curious about others, who ask, who listen, who show up, are the ones who quietly hold communities together. You do not need power or money or a grand plan. You need only to look up, notice the person beside you, and be willing to say hello. Thank you for listening.